No, we weren't people. Why would I do that? 1840, 50, 60. From the two states that my relatives were from. And I found my great-great-grandfather, very easily. His name was Noah Congo. And I found his mother, Maria Congo, and I found that there were Congos in the first census of the United States. And one of the things I found about them was that they represent one of the kinds of stories that the Garifuna represent, which is the meeting of Africans with indigenous people and the creation of new cultures that are Afro-Indigenous. And it's really absurd that there's so little research on this theme, because this is probably the major meeting that happened throughout the Americas. Every place where there were Africans, they were there. Why? Because the indigenous people had been decimated, so somebody had to come work. As a result of that presence of two groups oppressed by the same people, those two groups often came together. They revolted together in many places in the Americas. And of course, they made more human beings every place in the Americas. And that's one of the really untold stories. And so the Garifuna example reminds us that we need, if we're gonna know about the stories of the Americas, we need to know that story too. The language. Now, I have one major frustration about the Garifuna language, and I perhaps have some nerve to be frustrated about it. It's not my language, I don't speak it. I only know one word. Well, I guess I know two. But one is the word for human being. What's the word for human being in Garifuna? Huh? Okay, but what's man? What, man? Mutu? Yeah. Mutu. Okay. Well, that's a really important word. And it's a really important word because in all of Central Africa, that word means one human being. Muntu means one human being. You may have heard of the Bantu-speaking people in the whole southern half of Africa. Well, Bantu means plural human beings, but the singular is Muntu. I was with some people from Cameroon who are culturally knowledgeable and interested in the connections a couple of days ago, and for some reason, I didn't intend to do this, but I intended to do it. I played some Garifuna music for them, and they said, "Where is this from?" And I said, well, the Garifuna people, mainly Central America. I'm going to St. Vincent, where their homeland is. And some of the music, they said, oh, that's from Northern Cameroon. We recognize that. Some of the rhythms, they said, oh, that's from Eastern Cameroon. We recognize that. And so it bothers me that whereas there is research on the Garifuna language that talks about the English words, the Spanish words, the French words, where's the research about the African words? Because if such an important word as Muntu is part of the language, there's got to be more. I mean, I told you up front, I'm from Jersey, and I know some Wolof words that my father used. Well, I think you, Garifuna-speaking people, have many more African words than I've learned in the United States, or that I've learned in the Americas. It's inevitable. Nothing else makes sense. In the languages that Africans have created in the Americas, so all the Creoles, Haitian Creole, all the French Creoles, Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe, St. Lucia, and Dominica, the only Spanish Creole, Palenquero in Colombia, the English Creole. Those Creoles all have a lot of African words, African grammatical features, so it's impossible that the language of the Garifuna people not have African terms, African expressions, African grammatical formations. The Portuguese of Brazil, a lot of the basic grammatical features of the Portuguese of Brazil in comparison to the Portuguese of Portugal, so colonial Portuguese, the differences are because of Africa. The grammatical features are African, they're not European. So I'm frustrated about this lack of attention to the African substratum of this language, and I'm sure it's there. And I don't really have the right to be sure, I'm not a linguist, but I'm convinced just based on other African diasporans in the world. So, it's one more Afro-Indigenous feature, the cassava bread. I spent a little time with the Saramaka people, some of the Maroons in Suriname. One of the two major groups of Maroons in Suriname, there is the Saramaka and the Njuka. And when I saw the cassava bread being made today in one of the films we saw, I saw exactly the same cassava bread being made in the interior of Suriname among the Saramaka. Why? The same Afro-Indigenous meeting. The Saramaka sleep in hammocks. That's indigenous to the Americas. That's not African. And so you can trace the different kind of cultural features that are African, that are indigenous. I also, as part of trying to get to know the global African diaspora, spent some time on Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean. So, on the east side of Africa. And I wondered, what am I going to do in this little piece of France in the Indian Ocean? Well, I stayed with Afro-Reunion people, and one of the phenomena I got to discover was they have ceremonies for ancestors. And I got to participate in some of these ceremonies, and in their ceremonies for ancestors, it's grandfather who's coming back, it's great uncle somebody. They're known, the ancestors are known. And I wondered, how come this doesn't exist in the Americas, or does it? Where might it exist in the Americas? I'd been to ceremonies in Brazil, Egungun ceremonies that are Yoruba, but those are generic ancestors. It's not my grandfather or somebody's great uncle. I'd been to kind of an ancestor celebration in Cuba, but it wasn't personal, specific ancestors. And I wondered, might the Duga be something like this ancestral celebration in Reunion Island? And so finally, after 20 years, I heard about the fact that there was the Duga 20 years ago. And every time I met a Garifuna, I said, I really need to go to a Duga because I need to understand this. And they said, oh yeah, okay, fine, if there's one, I'll tell you. Nobody ever told me because they're ancestral, they're about family. I'm nobody's family. But I was in Honduras a couple of years ago, and I heard that there was going to be a Duga, and I was very, very persistent. Can I come? Well, what do I have to do to come? Who's going to let me come? Can I get permission? So I was sufficiently persistent, perhaps annoying, that I was allowed to attend. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just sit in the corner and watch. And then I found, no, you won't. Nobody sits in the corner and watches. Everybody's got to participate. So I danced for 3 days in the Duga. And I felt very welcomed, and I felt very honored to be able to be a participant in such an important ceremony. Such an important ceremony, clearly, for the families that were having the ceremony, for Garifuna people in general, but also to help the rest of us in the diaspora to understand the importance of remembering ancestors, not just my grandmother, grandfather, great-grandparents, although it was fascinating to find them in the census, but to remember what they represent, that they represent our heritage, who we are, and all of the ancestors. So I hope that we can have a little discussion. And so I want to stop right there and not say anything more and see if I can make this go away. And Sereme. Well, I can't make it go away. I hope you have questions, comments. I love questions and comments because I learn things because people ask questions about things I didn't know they were going to think about. Is there a process? Yes.